Good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for the fifth session of our first ever virtual 55 and Better Expo series. My name is Lindsay Haynes. I am the event manager with Prairie Mountain Media, and I will also be the moderator for today's session. So before we get started, I did want to go ahead and point out that whether you are on a computer or a tablet, you will have access to a question and answer or a chat portion of the Zoom webinar. So if at any point during today's presentation, if you have any questions, make sure to type them in that Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll make sure to address those and get those answered for you following the end of today's presentation. So today's session will be covering prearrangement planning and protecting your family through the prearrangement process. We have Greg Hershelman today. He is going to be our speaker. He is the family service manager for Dignity Memorial, as well as Resthaven Funeral Home. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Greg.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today as we discuss protecting our family and your family through the pre-planning process. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And this is something that we actually put on for the community and invite folks out to join us pretty regularly. So I'm glad to be here and doing this virtually for a change. It's something that we describe this pre-planning process and hopefully get folks thinking about this, because let's face it, death is not something that we think about on a daily basis. And what ends up happening is on what very well could be the worst day of our lives and our families' lives, they end up sitting down with the funeral director without a plan, and that's where I step in as the family service manager to assist folks with that pre-planning process. I've been with Dignity, which is a network of funeral homes across the country, approximately about 2,000 locations throughout North America, Canada, and Puerto Rico. And I've been with Dignity now for about 4 years. And to be honest, prior to working with Dignity, in Resthaven Funeral Home here in Fort Collins, I never saw myself working for a funeral home. It's definitely not a profession that I had dreamed about as a kid and thought I would be a part of. But during my time with Dignity, I realized that really this discussion is about protecting our families more so than it is about our own death. And it's really helped me to find fulfillment and just assisting families to remove that burden from their family and protect them from having to meet with that funeral director and not knowing what the next step is, or maybe even possibly not knowing who to call when that time comes. And so that has helped me to see past the working for a funeral director or for working for a funeral home company and see it more as really a service to our community. So I'm going to be going through a little bit of information. And just as we had mentioned earlier, if you have a question, please feel free to post that, and I will answer those. But I'm going to take my time and refer back to some of my information so I can be sure to get you as much information as possible here. So, there we go. All right. So the pre-planning process is truly about creating a peace of mind, and we're trying to remove the burden from yourself and your family, rather than creating burden by leaving it up to chance. And let's face it, there's plenty of stress in life. And in fact, University of Washington Medical School conducted a survey several years back, and what they were truly trying to figure out is life's most stressful events. And these are the top 6 that they came up with. And looking at these 6, I'd like to ask everybody to just ask yourself which of these you would rank as being the most stressful event out of going through a divorce, marriage, loss of job, death of a loved one, personal injury or illness, or death of a spouse or a partner. Now, personally, I guess, unfortunately and fortunately, I have experienced most of these over the past few years of my life. And I say fortunately because having been through these things, I can relate to folks who have also experienced these stressful events and help through that process. So next, I'm going to show you the results from that survey. And the number one most stressful event, as listed by the University of Washington, is death of a spouse or a partner. And we can see number 2 is divorce, and number 3 is death of a loved one. So out of the top 3, or I'm sorry, out of the top 6, the 3 at the top are death of a spouse and death of a loved one. And being that that is the most stressful events that we can experience in our lifetime, pre-planning seems to kind of make sense, right? What typically happens is, again, on the most stressful day of our lives, we ask ourselves this question: what now? Who do we call? And what do we want to remember about our loved one's life? And again, I'd like to ask everybody to ask yourself, would you know what to do if you experienced the death of a loved one or the death of a spouse? Would you know who to call, and would you know what they wanted? Again, this discussion is truly about protecting your family from having to make those decisions on the most stressful day of their lives. And if we think about our lives, we plan for all of life's big events: weddings and birthdays and college education, retirement, all of these things that might happen, right? We may get to a point that we get to retire one day. We may get married one day. So if it makes sense to plan for these big events in life that might happen, I believe that it makes more sense to plan for the inevitable, right? Plan for an event that we know is going to happen. And not only are we protecting our loved ones from having to make these decisions, but we also lock in the cost of those final arrangements, and basically keep our families from wondering if they had done the right thing for us. So we have simplified this process, and this task can really be overwhelming. There are a lot of different choices out there. Our lives can be celebrated in countless different ways. And so because of that, because we know it's an overwhelming task to begin that pre-planning process, we've done our best to simplify that down to just 4 simple steps. And the first one is to reflect. And this is where we're going to think about what's important to us. And here's where questions such as, do I want traditional burial? What kind of casket would I want? Or am I going to do cremation? And then beyond those questions of just answering what I want for myself, where would that be? If I'm going to be cremated, what location, what funeral home would I use for that? If I'm going to be buried, what cemetery am I going to be laid to rest at? So that's the first step, is just to begin reflecting on what's important to us. And then we can start to formulate our ideas on how we would like our life to be commemorated. The second step is to record. And for this step, we actually have created a personal planning guide. And Dignity has invested about $250,000 in creating this planning guide by working with families who we've served in the past, in asking them what would have been helpful, what questions having answers for would have helped them through this process. And this guide answers about 95% of the questions that a funeral director asks of your family when they're meeting with them. And that the planning guide is 100% complimentary. And now we actually have a digital version as well. So that can be emailed out and worked through that way. We also have a planning guide for our veteran community as well. This is going to help them to bring together all the forms necessary to take advantage of their burial benefits and of the funeral benefits as well. And this is something that we take pride in at Dignity, to support our veteran community and ensure that they all get the benefits that are due to them. Now, the third step is to secure the plans. Now that we have reflected on what's important and we've come up with what we want and how we'd like our lives to be remembered, we've documented these wishes. Now we're able to secure those wishes by actually choosing the plan that fits our needs, locking in today's costs, flexible funding options that we're able to kind of choose our terms. And so essentially that eases the financial burden that our family is going to experience. Now, the fourth step, because we believe that this is an extremely important process, and it only really is effective if our family knows that it is in place. So the fourth step is to share that our plans are completed and where they are completed. And beyond that, the personal planning guide, letting them know that it has been filled out, maybe going through it with our family as well, and then letting them know where it has been stored is going to be extremely important, so that they have access to those answers that the funeral director is going to ask them. So pre-planning is it's an extremely wise decision. The biggest thing, of course, is removing that emotional burden that your family is going to go through after your passing, and then removing the financial burden as well. And we tend to find that folks pre-plan for one or the other of those reasons, either the financial burden or the emotional burden. And beyond that, there's a couple of reasons within that that folks choose to pre-plan, whether it's flexible payment options, the fact that it does lock in today's costs, or possibly that they just don't want their kids to have to deal with answering those questions, coming up with the funds to pay for those those arrangements and things like that. So here at Dignity, we believe in the pre-planning process, but it's not just about pre-planning with us. Of course, we would love for you to pre-plan with us. Again, we are a community or a network of funeral homes that range across North America and Canada and Puerto Rico. And because of that, we have provider benefits that a lot of other providers are unable to offer to their families. But beyond that, our desire for you to prearrange with us, we really just believe in the pre-planning process, and we give this information out complimentary, so that you're able to make that decision and just go ahead and take those steps to pre-plan for yourself, whether it's with us or another provider. And some things that I would suggest looking for would be a high standard of service that comes along with a service guarantee. With Dignity, we do offer a 100% service guarantee. And what that means is that you have the peace of mind to know that the services that you're pre-planning for, that you're not going to be there for, are going to be up to your family's expectations. So when we are conducting the services for your family, we're going to live up to their expectations and make sure that everything's right. Here at Dignity, we know that we only get one chance to make things right, and we really strive for perfection. And when that doesn't happen, I've seen things where, say the flowers come to the service and they're wilted, or whatever the case may be, they're not up to our standards. And even though these come from an outside provider, it still falls under the service guarantee. And I've seen providers or the funeral home refund the cost of the flowers, all the way up to refunding the full amount of a service because it wasn't up to the expectations. That's the level of service that we look to live up to. With that nationwide network, the plans are actually transferable as well, which is big. If we don't know what might occur tomorrow, it's probably safe to say that we really don't know where we might be living 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And it's important to know that when you create these pre-arrangements, and regardless of what the future holds for you, you'll be able to take these plans with you and simply just transfer them to the nearest Dignity provider. Studies show that 80% of America lives within 30 minutes of a Dignity provider. So the chances are, wherever you might move, there's going to be a provider that will accept those pre-arrangements and carry out those services when the time comes. We also offer bereavement travel and grief support. So the bereavement support is kind of like a concierge. So if you have family and friends who live out of town, or they need to travel for any reason due to the service itself, they can call our concierge service and simply give them a credit card, and our concierge will take care of everything else, flights, hotels, cars, everything necessary for them to get from point A to point B, be there in time for your service. And again, this would actually cover if they needed to fly somewhere to handle closing the estate, whatever the case may be, they're able to use our travel assistance there. Grief support, we have a helpline that gives us access to master's level grief counselors. And your family would have access to them for up to 13 months after the service, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The great thing about this service is that once they begin calling, they're able to request the same person that they have talked to in the past. So they can build a relationship with this grief counselor and work through that process with them. And at the end of the 13 weeks, if they still believe, if your family is still grieving and still needing assistance working through that, our helpline will actually recommend a local provider. And the first session is included in our grief support as well. Now, we know that folks don't always want to call somebody and talk on the phone to work through that grief. So because of that, we have hard copy grief library with pamphlets and DVDs to, again, support your family as they go through that process and help through that time in their lives. So, well, you know, I'm going to touch base on the last piece of that. On the last slide, it talked about licensed professionals who educate the community. And that's like myself. I'm the family service manager, so I have several associates who work with me to simply educate the community on pre-planning and just the fact that you can pre-plan. A lot of folks don't realize that you're able to plan out the entire process all the way down to locking in the costs of those choices. And so those are just a few things that, as you're going through the pre-planning process and you're looking for a provider, that I would suggest to look for in the provider that you choose. A lot of these things that are showing right now, I have already mentioned, but I'm going to reiterate just a couple of these. So here with Dignity, we do have grief support for your family as they go through that process. We do have our licensed professionals who are just looking to educate the community, pass out these personal planning guides, which again are 100% complimentary and just assist in walking through and answering these questions to ensure that there is a plan in place. We honor those who serve by also handing out the Veterans Planning Guide, which comprises all of the forms necessary to take advantage of those benefits that are due to our veterans. And again, we have 2,000 locations nationwide. So I figured that I would probably be around 20 minutes, and I've talked a little faster than I even anticipated with that. And we're getting to the end of the information about pre-planning. And just one last thing that I will reiterate here is that we have simplified this process down to 4 simple steps. And again, that was to reflect, record, secure, and then share that plan. And the great thing about this, and what I always kind of urge folks to do, is just take the first step, which is to reflect. Just think the thought of what's going to happen when I pass. Will my family know what to do? And you know, have I answered some of these questions for them? Who to call and how I want to be remembered. Even just starting with that first step is going to remove a big burden off of your family. And if it does lead into you taking that second step and requesting a personal planning guide, one of my associates or myself would be happy to walk through that planning guide with you and assist you in documenting those wishes so that the answers are there for your family. So at the end of the day, there's 2 questions that can never be answered if things have not been planned out. And that's, did your family do the right thing, and did they do what you had wanted? And those first 2 steps of this process would answer those questions. Even if you never took the last step to lock in today's cost and financially protect your family. So thank you so much for joining this afternoon. I would love to answer any questions that you have for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. So one of the main, I guess, frequently asked questions, and some of that we've been receiving, is really, I guess, besides the payment, is, I know you touched on it a little bit, but who should be involved in discussing these end-of-life arrangements, right? It's not something you should have to decide for yourself, right? I know that's kind of a misconception sometimes.
That's a great question. And it's actually a question that comes up really often where, folks want to protect their kids from having to make these decisions, but they also want them to be included in the in making the decision. So, I always say that it's entirely up to the individual who's pre-planning for themselves. At the end of the day, it is our responsibility to plan for ourselves. But if the idea is that we're going to pre-plan a service that's going to be for our kids and our loved ones, it's a great idea to include them in the pre-planning process and include them in answering some of these questions that are in the personal planning guide. And what I love to do is, if it's not possible for us all to meet together, meet with the kids and the rest of the family so that they're involved, I always ask folks if I can meet with them or take the kids a personal planning guide and help them to document their wishes, because once they've walked through that planning guide, they know what's there, and they'll be a little bit more prepared when the day comes that they're having to meet with the funeral director and look that information up.
Awesome. And so I will go ahead and ask a couple questions just on the payment. I know it's different, with different funeral services and funeral homes. And then as well as it always depends on the specific types of things you want included in your ceremonies. But, what is something, do you take a percentage in a prepayment plan? Is it more just based on, we need to cover these costs first? What's kind of the process if they are interested in doing kind of a prepayment?
Another great question. Again, I kind of stress the fact that you're able to take steps that you're ready for with the pre-planning process. And it's the same thing when it comes to locking in today's costs, because I have definitely assisted folks who could only take on a portion financially. They were only able to afford a small portion of the arrangements at that time. And so we are able to basically break the pre-arrangement up into sections, if you will, and start with just the absolute necessary items in order to fit the budget that we're needing to work with. So you can absolutely bite off as much as you can, if you will, and then if it's possible to take on the entire arrangement, that's great. So one other thing that I would mention in terms of the financial aspect is that these pre-arrangements can actually be fully insured as well. So you have the ability to purchase a pre-arrangement that while you're making payments on it, if you were to pass, the insurance company would pay off the remaining balance. And then you're able to also choose it if that's not an option that fits your budget or fits your needs. You could just simply begin a contract for your prearranged services that has no insurance protection, which of course means there's not going to be a cost of insurance. And you're able to just break that payment out over 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years, whatever again is going to fit your financial needs. And the great thing is that there's no interest that's charged over that amount of time. So it locks in today's costs and it doesn't charge interest when you're doing that.
Awesome. So kind of a little bit of a follow-up. We did get a question come in. So what are some costs that aren't so common that people maybe need to consider? Do you have any examples of that? Of course, we know that there's, the caskets or the urns or whatever they decide to do, but is there any kind of costs that come up that people don't necessarily consider on a normal basis?
Yeah, again, great question. So what we refer to as third-party services or non-guaranteed items, these are things that typically will pop up or be unexpected. And these would be things like death certificates, taxes, obituaries, different things like that go along with a service taking place. Of course, we need death certificates. A lot of folks want an obituary notice to be in the newspaper. And then again, taxes, we're unable to prearrange them. So we're able to set aside funds for these items in sort of a savings account, if you will, so that when the time comes, we have funds set aside for these. Another thing that I'm seeing is more and more common that really wasn't even a thought previously in the last 5 years or so, is that after a service takes place, whether it's a memorial service, a funeral service, or a burial at the cemetery, family they tend to want a place to gather after that, where they can continue being with the fellowship of their family, right? And
right.
So something that we offer as part of the pre-arrangement and actually as part of the guaranteed items is a reception. And with any of our locations that you were to choose, by choosing a reception, it actually will lock in the cost of food for a certain amount of people. So if you believe that you'll have 25 family members that'll show up, you can lock in the cost of a reception for them, and we include our facility in that cost at essentially no additional cost. So it takes care of that. That it gives them a place to gather and continue that fellowship.
Great. We also had a great question come in as well from the audience. So how young can I be to set up prearrangements? Could I do it maybe at age 50? And then would that lock in the price like 30 years down the road? So is there an age that's too early? Yeah.
So that is a great question. What we see is that primarily 45 to 60 is where folks start to think about this process. And I guess we've gotten to the point where we're no longer immortal, right? we've gotten past that belief, and we start to think about what's going to happen. And for the most part, that's where we see folks prearrange. But realistically, 18 is probably the youngest, because it is a contract, and if you chose insurance backed, you're going to need to be able to sign. So really, there's no age limit. But even if you're 18 years old and you decided to prearrange, it locks in the cost. It doesn't matter if it's 10 years or 100 years down the road; those costs are locked in to what we have prearranged for.
Great. Okay, great. So kind of tying in actually to something that you just mentioned, we're no longer, or not even, but we're not immortal, right? And so with the COVID-19 pandemic that we've kind of been facing, I did have a couple questions that I wanted to just ask, whether it regards to Dignity Memorial or, Resthaven Funeral Home in specifics. But so when you're making prearrangement plans or even just funeral plans, I mean, how does COVID-19 and this pandemic affect what they would have done in the past to what they should be taking into consideration now?
Yeah. So for the most part, I would say about 90% of the prearrangements we are putting in place, we're expecting that those services are going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And so we plan as normal, with the thought in mind that this isn't going to be a forever scenario, right? We're not going to be limited to 50 people for a service or whatever the case is right now. So we plan out everything as normal. But really, right now, and even for the folks who had pre-planned, 20 years ago, and they planned for this big service with 200 people to show up, they didn't miss out on it. They didn't lose anything, if you will. So what would end up happening is, because there are some of those third-party services that will come up, such as death certificates, taxes, different things like that, we're able to just pull from those additional funds that may have been for service items that are not going to be utilized due to the smaller service, and just apply them to different areas that are necessary. And then at the end of the day, if there are funds left over in an event like that, we are able to refund those costs if we don't have anything else to apply them to.
Okay. Yeah, great. So for timing, for example, is the pandemic kind of affecting people's timing of their plans? Or I guess as a quick follow-up to that question too, is leading into kind of the virtual experience that you've been having for your services?
You mean timing is just as far as folks' age who were helping to pre-plan?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. I still think that 45 to 60 age range is where we're really seeing a lot of people either call in or just be interested in taking some of these steps, or at least become educated on what it takes to pre-plan. And so that's kind of stayed the same, but there definitely has been an influx of people requesting pre-planning information. And that's, very quickly, of course, when everything kind of set off back in March and April, the Dignity had taken upon themselves to just take our pre-planning guide and make it digital, to where we can email it out to folks and start to get that pre-planning information in their hands and help them to reflect on what's going to be important and what will fulfill their wishes, if you will. And so we've done a great job in just sending out as many digital versions of this pre-planning guide as we can to, again, just help folks through those first couple of steps. But again, the age range is still kind of remain the same.
So are you guys currently open for still in-person arrangement planning? I know we're in a period of where, the restrictions are kind of lifting, but going into, the winter, we might see restrictions kind of coming back. But as of right now, are you guys open for in-person planning? And then do you have virtual options for anybody who is a little bit nervous about being in person still?
Absolutely. We are offering both options. So myself and my entire team have essentially downloaded everything digitally that we could possibly bring out. All the information that we would typically bring to you, we have downloaded and just at the ready for when folks are wanting to meet virtually. But we are still offering in-person meetings as well, whether that's at our locations or in-home. That is still a possibility. The locations have really taken some pretty strict measures to ensure that we're cleaning up before and after when we meet folks, and just different thing, of course, masks and everything else that goes along with that. But we are still offering in-person meeting or virtual, whichever families are comfortable with.
Okay, great. So virtual ceremonies, for example, are you currently hosting them? And then
Yes.
I think as a little bit of a follow-up, what's the cost difference like compared to maybe an in-person funeral or ceremony?
So yes, we are. Our funeral director here at Resthaven has actually been using Zoom a lot to live stream these services.
Hmm.
And to be honest with you, though, I don't know that there is an additional, and if there is for the live streaming service, I don't know right offhand what the cost would be, but I feel that there isn't a cost to it, but I would have to verify that.
Yeah, no problem. So we did have another question come in. So why shouldn't I leave any planning arrangements in my will, for example?
So part of the pre-planning guide is, or a portion of the pre-planning guide talks about the location of a will and things like that. And probably um, the best example to give would be a lot of us believe, death occurs, and as soon as the death occurs, we pull the will out to see what's happening, or kind of like the movies show, they show how everybody gathers and there is a reading of the will in front of the family. And that's not
Uh-huh.
necessarily how things happen. And instead, death occurs and somebody needs to call a funeral home or, start to take these steps towards the pre-planning process. And the will is not, it's typically not going to be the go-to
Hmm.
for answering those questions.
Okay, great. Let's see. I just want to double check, make sure I didn't miss anybody's questions here. Um, Oh, I did read too on the Resthaven specifically, but they kind of touch base on going back to a payment plan and options, a couple different trust options. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that just a little bit in case I missed it or we had anybody that was a little confused.
Absolutely. So I'll end up reiterating some of the things that I had mentioned earlier as we were discussing the financing options.
Hmm.
But essentially, there are three. Let me make sure that I'm not missing something in my head. There's three different options when we're financing a prearrangement, um, and this is actually a huge benefit again with Dignity. The best way that we have that we can prearrange for folks, of course, is when we're doing it years and years in advance. There's no thought that this may be something that's going to happen in the next couple of months. And so what we do is we create the prearrangement as an insurance product. Well, Dignity itself is not an insurance company. So that means that a third party is holding onto those funds. And that basically eliminates the ability of the location using those funds to keep the doors open, right? We're not able to tap into prearranged funds in order to keep the lights on and keep things moving around here and basically dwindle down those funds. So
Hmm.
that protects our clients who have decided to prearrange. The other option, of course, I had mentioned how some folks choose not to have that insurance-backed prearrangement. And so we're able to do what's called a flexible option. And the great thing is the insurance company still holds onto the funds, but there's no cost of insurance. We simply choose the amount of time that we would like to finance these options for. There's no interest included, but the insurance company still holds on to those funds. Again, removing the ability of a location to use those funds. And the reason I mention that is because that is something that we have seen happen where, say a local provider, uses those funds, or they go bankrupt, whatever the case is, well, those prearrangements are no longer there because this company has gone bankrupt. And so by using that third-party service, it protects our clients from that happening. Now, a trust contract is what we would use in the event of an imminent need, where we believe that these services are going to take place in the next weeks, days, or months. And that way, the funeral home does have access to those funds immediately. That way, when the time comes that we are performing those services, we're able to, again, just access those funds immediately.
Okay.
Just one final piece with that, when families choose to have the insurance-backed prearrangement, it doesn't delay anything in the service because our third-party provider, because we work with them so seamlessly, it doesn't delay anything or delay the payout to the funeral home in order to conduct the service.
Great. Actually, that really clarifies it. So thank you again. I know you mentioned it a little bit previously, but so it looks like we don't have any more questions from the audience. You answered all of the ones that I had. So I just wanted to say thank you, Greg, so much for coming over and kind of talking to us about the prearrangement process and how important it really is. And, you know, it's not very often that we do get to hear from, you know, managers or higher ups. So I think it's very unique that you came in today, and especially since it is a sensitive subject, but, you know, the pandemic has kind of made everybody think twice about things that matter to them. So I think it was very, I guess, informational, but also it's kind of a positive thing, right? You want to make sure that you're taken care of and that your family is as well. So, I just wanted to remind everybody too, and we are recording this webinar. So if you know of anybody that you think would like to see this, you wanted to watch it again, or you wanted to find out a little bit more about Dignity Memorial, you can actually access that on our website. So that URL specifically is Northern Colorado 55better.com, and then that'll take you right to our Expo page. You'll be able to register for other webinars that we'll be hosting next week. And if you have any additional questions, we've got those resources for you, so we can connect you with Greg or anybody at Resthaven Funeral Home. So thanks again, Greg, and
thank
everybody.
You so much for having me.
Yeah, have a great weekend, and we'll be back on Monday.